Welcome to the Quest Forums channel, and as we continue our study in the Gospel of Mark, we're going to be looking at chapter 7 and also at the first part of chapter 8, going up to verse 21. If you remember from last time, we looked at Mark chapter 6 and saw the provision of God, the fact that we need to rely on God for the things that we require, and that we can find them in Christ. There's a lot in there about the fact that He is God, that that's who He's showing Himself to be. And that continues in chapter 7 and in chapter 8. A lot of what we see here concerns food. Now, it starts and ends, it's bookended, by conflicts with the religious authorities, and that is kind of what they come down to as well. The middle portion of this passage is important because it extends the concept of provision, where before it had mostly been that Jesus came for Jewish people, because he was Jewish and because the promises of the Messiah were given to God's chosen people, it made sense that he would do so. But now he begins to include Gentiles more and more, showing that they also are going to receive God's promises of salvation that come through him. The big capstone for this being the feeding of the 4,000, which is a miracle very similar to the feeding of the 5,000, but it is also different. It's not identical, and we can tell those differences, and what they teach us is that, yes, Jesus is making the point that what he's done for one group, he's doing for the other, to show that all people can belong to him if they come to him by faith. And so that's an important lesson for us to take. And most of my audience, I assume, is going to be people who are non-Jewish. And so it's good for us to know and to remember that we have been provided for as well. Now, as for the conflicts, the one that starts in chapter 7, that has to do, again, with food and with ritual observation. And Jesus explains that it's not what we eat that makes us unclean in God's sight. That's not what matters. What matters is what comes out of us. What matters is what's in our hearts, the choices that we make, the things that we desire, and how we act on them. And if we do so in a way that's not in God's will, then that separates from us. That is what makes us unworthy of him. That is sin. And that's what we have to be concerned with. And at the end, when we move on into chapter 8, the conflict is again with the Pharisees, where they demand a sign from Jesus because apparently everything else he's done to this point isn't good enough. And so they want something. They're always demanding more because they're not willing to really pay attention to what they should have already seen. And so Jesus is frustrated with this, and he basically blows them off, and he leaves. And he's still frustrated, and he tells his disciples to beware the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they don't get what he means, which of course we've seen a lot with all the disciples in the book of Mark, and we're going to continue to see. And they think that he's talking about food because they haven't brought any with them. And so Jesus comes down on them pretty hard, and he asks them, how is it that you're still not able to understand this? Haven't you seen me feed 5,000 at once? How much was left over? You've seen me feed 4,000 at once. How much was left over? You still don't get it? How can you not understand this? And what he's trying to get them to is that provision's not the question. Jesus is fully capable of giving us everything that we need. The problem, the leaven that he's talking about with the Pharisees and with Herod, is their willful resistance to the things of God. Because that was about the one thing that united them. There was not very much that was shared in common between the Pharisees and the Herodians. But what they did have in common is that they were not interested in what God was accomplishing in Christ. And so Jesus is warning his disciples, don't take up that attitude, because if you do, it's going to spread, it will infect everything in your life, and it will destroy you. And that's the same warning that we need to have today, is that we need to be willing to open our eyes to the things that God has shown us and what he's provided for us in Christ. And when we are his followers, we also need to continue to work at understanding. Because that's the thing, the disciples are usually a negative example. This is one place where we can maybe turn that a little bit and try to start seeing the positives. Because in spite of the fact that they still didn't understand, they kept coming back. And we're the same. We don't always understand what God is doing. But if we are followers of Christ, we're going to keep coming back. We're going to keep turning to him, try to seek that understanding, seek his provision, even when we don't fully get what's going on. And we need to keep coming back for that. And so that really is the heart of this passage. That's what's going on here. That's what I see as being most important. But maybe you have something else in mind, or maybe something sticks out to you through reading it. If you want to go ahead and share that, or if you have a question about it, or something else in the Bible, do feel free to leave that in the comments below. Thanks very much for checking out this video, and until next time, keep looking up.